Hi there. Today I picked, as you can see behind me, a ton of tomatoes from our garden, with the help of the girls, of course. And we are gonna can them into tomato sauce. So I thought I'd bring you along for the ride. But before we get started, I wanted to share a couple things that would make your job easier. We will be using a water bath canner for this, so that is fairly cheap. You don't need the big expensive pressure canner to do tomato sauce, but a couple of the things that will make your life easier when you're doing this and quicker. I am going to use a kitchen scale, and this will help me to get my measurements right with the tomatoes. You of course need your jar clamper, I guess is what they call it, to get your jars in and out of the canner safely without burning yourself. I will use this little thing. I don't even know what it's called, but it is used for canning to get out any air bubbles, and then also on this side helps to get the appropriate headspace. And then the biggest investment, if you plan on doing tomato sauce every year, say you grow a garden and you plan on growing tomatoes and making them into sauce and then canning them, is I highly recommend this food mill. So it attaches to the table. Unfortunately, my counters don't give enough space for it to attach, so I usually do it on my kitchen table, or I set it up on a separate table. And this will save you so much time because it's going to spit out the seeds and the skin, and it's only going to save, so this attaches right here, and you pour the tomatoes in through here. It's gonna spit out the things you don't want, and it's gonna save the puree part of it. Saves so much time. So if you are planning, I got this on Amazon. I will link it to my Amazon storefront. Same with my scale and my water bath canner if I can find it. All of these things I got on Amazon. So if I can find them on there, I will link them for you. So these are the tools that I use to do this. Now, if you don't have a food mill, you don't need to run off and go buy one. Like I said, it does make your job easier, but you can also de-skin them and scrape out the seeds by hand. It just takes a lot more time and manpower. I would still recommend, if you don't have a kitchen scale, I use this for so many things in the kitchen. So I do recommend getting this. I mean, that's the best way to get your accurate measurements. And then for the canner, I use a traditional water bath canner that I bought on Amazon, but you can use a stock pot. You just need to have a tray that fits at the bottom, or a rack, I guess is what you could say. So if all you need to get is the insert for a big, large stock pot that you have, so your jars are not sitting on the bottom of the pot. That will help them to not break or crack while they're being processed. So those are the tools that you will need, and I will share the recipe now and how I do it. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the end off that the stem was on, and then I'm just gonna look for any spots. And actually, this one grew very nicely. It has no bad spots, so I'm just gonna quarter them up. This is just to get them through the food mill easier. So I'm gonna go through all of them. What I have here is my kitchen scale with a big bowl on it, and I have tared it, and I am going to put it to pounds because I want to see how many pounds this is. The recipe that I have goes for 45 pounds. I don't believe I have 45 pounds worth of tomatoes here, so I want to see how many I have to adjust what I need accordingly. Okay, so it took about 15-20 minutes to trim and slice up all of my tomatoes. It was about 10 pounds of tomatoes. So that's where the kitchen scale becomes really important, to know how many pounds you have, because when you go to add the spices, you just want to make sure that you don't add too much of anything or something like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run it all through my food mill. My countertops have a lip underneath it, and so it doesn't fit completely on it. So I have to always do it on my kitchen table, which I'm not thrilled about, but it is what it is, and we make do with what you have. How it works is I will stick all of the tomatoes, the sliced and trimmed tomatoes, in here. I'm gonna crank it, and as I'm cranking it, the seeds and the skins and the core and all of that you don't want are gonna come out here into my already started chicken scraps from trimming the tomatoes. And the puree part of it is gonna come through here. So I will show you how that happens. We're gonna grab a handful here. I'm gonna just turn it. Oops. There we go. Didn't have this on correctly. I might have had to help remove it. All right. And then this little handy tool just kind of pushes them in for you as they go. And all you're wanting here is just your tomatoes to be skinned for you. As I'm working in batches, I will say this, it is a very messy job doing this. So you will have tomato juice in your kitchen, but nothing that can't be cleaned up. And fresh tomato sauce is so delicious. Okay, so I'm just continuing to work through batches, using my little pounder to shove them in. And as you can see now, in the first video you couldn't, but as you can see now, it's starting to come out. The skins and all the things that you don't want in your tomato sauce, the seeds, are coming out the front, and the chickens will love you on tomato making, sauce making day. And if you have children, they love to do this part. Okay, so I've gotten all of my tomatoes pureed through my food mill. And but I should have probably said this from the beginning. When you're canning tomato sauce, it's an all-day project. So just be prepared for that. You want to pick your tomatoes early in the morning because that's when they hold in all their juices and good stuff. You would not want to pick them the day before. Do it right when you're going to do it because that's when you're going to get the freshest. And then it's about an hour to an hour and a half of just prepping the sauce. And then the sauce is going to cook down on the stove for 4 to 5 hours. Just depends on how long it takes to evaporate all of the moisture and get a really good hearty sauce. So, and then you're gonna can it. So I would say just be prepared. It's not a full day's of work, but it is gonna take all day from start to finish to get it done. So just as a FYI, I probably should have said that from the beginning. Okay, so now I have all my pureed 10 pounds of tomatoes. I am gonna add in 2 cups of chopped onion. I just chopped these in my food processor, so you don't need to take all the time. It took me about 2 seconds to chop all of those. Then I have about 3 cloves of garlic minced in here, and I'm gonna add that to my tomatoes. And then in this bowl, I have a whole bunch of different spices. I just kind of added it all together so you didn't have to watch me measure everything out. But what I have in here is about 1.5 teaspoons of oregano. I have about a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of black pepper, a 1/2 teaspoon of red pepper flakes, and then I have about a teaspoon of brown sugar in here. You can use white granulated sugar. I just chose to use brown sugar, and I'm gonna dump all of this in with it. I'm gonna give it a good stir, which I just realized I forgot a normal size spoon. 1 second. Okay, so now I'm just gonna mix this all in, and I'm gonna stick it on my stovetop back there. At this point, I'm not gonna prepare my canner at all because I know this has a couple hours, 2 to 5 hours worth of cooking down. What you are looking for is your sauce to just thicken. So you want it to reduce in size a little bit, and then you want it to thicken up as in a normal size tomato sauce. So I am going to stick this on the stovetop, and when it is cooked down, I will let you see what it is before we move on to the canning steps. Okay, so I wanted to give you guys a quick update. This has been going for a little over 2 hours-ish. Yeah, it's probably right at 2 hours. And you can kind of see the line, I'll point to it with my spoon, where I started. So it is reducing in size. It's still not quite the thickness that I want it to be, so I'm gonna let it keep going. And I'll just keep watching it and stirring it. I just have it on medium or just kind of slightly down, so it's just simmering this whole time. Okay, so I have my canner going. My jars are washed and in the canner heating up. This sauce is supposed to make about 6 pints. Since I want to do quarts, because quarts are like the size of what you would buy for tomato sauce or like a marinara sauce, spaghetti sauce at the store, I always can in quarts. So I am going to do 3 quart size jars. So those are in my canner right now. They're washed. and they're staying warm as my canner heats up. I still have just a little bit of time left in my sauce. It's definitely reducing in size. It's definitely getting thicker. So I'm just getting prepped for the next step. What you're going to want at this time to get set up and ready is your jars washed and in the canner. You want your lids and your rings out and washed. You're going to need a ladle. You're going to need I put it over there. Your jar clamper and that little stick to get the air bubbles out. And you can just use the end of a wooden spoon for that. You don't have to have a special tool for that. I just have one and it helps with the headspace. You are going to want some bottled lemon juice because in each jar you're going to want to put a tablespoon of bottled lemon juice. And then you're going to want a little bit of white distilled vinegar with a clean towel to clean off your rims before then. And the last thing you'll need, I'm doing this off of memory, is a wide mouth funnel. So when you're scooping in your sauce into your jars, it'll help without the mess. So those are the things you want to get ready, and we're just about ready to fill our jars. I was actually wrong. It's 2 tablespoons per quart jar. It's 1 tablespoon per pint-sized jar. So you want to do 2 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice per quart jar that you're using, and 1 per pint. So the recipe that I'm following, because it's an approved canning recipe, it is for pint jars, but I'm actually upping this to quart jars, and so I needed to add an extra tablespoon of lemon juice per jar. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and use my wide mouth funnel, and I am going to fill each of my jars to 1/2 inch of headspace. So I'm gonna try and not make a huge mess while doing this. Once you have everything filled, then you're going to use your little tool here. Oops, you can't even see that. Your little tool or the end of a spoon or skewer or anything to make sure that you have no air pockets in it. Being that this isn't a chunky and it's tomato sauce, it's liquid form, the chances of you getting much air pockets in it is slim. But it's always nice to check when you're dealing with trying to can food for shelf life. Okay, so I've almost got this one to the top. And what I'll do is I'll move on and fill the next one before I check it to make sure it's at the right headspace and make sure there's no air pockets. Because if there is any air pockets in it, it is gonna come out and you're gonna have to adjust that in your filling of your jar. Okay, so I was able to get 2 full quart-sized jars out of this and a little pint-sized jar of it. And there was a little bit left over, so I'll just stick that in the fridge and use it for something or toss it in if we make spaghetti coming up or anything like that. One thing I wanted to note, the headspace is very important to get a proper seal. So for this particular recipe that I'm following, it called for 1/2 inch of a headspace. That basically means you don't want the air in it to be not as close to the lid. So you really want it to be right. The other reason is if it's not accurate, it could seep out and that could also hinder a proper seal. So the headspace is very important. For probably the first year, I just used the lines on the jars, which does just fine, where this usually right here at the neck and that first ring is 1 inch, and then the next line up is 1/2 inch, and that's fine too. I always like to double check with this little tool. I got it on Amazon. It's super handy. It tells you right here in these little stair steps, 1 inch, 1/2 inch, all of that. So I just set it all along the rim on whatever one I want and make sure that the tip is at the food level. So that's easy. Okay, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take it, like I said, if you don't have it, you can just use the back of a spoon or something, and I'm just going to put it a couple times in each of the jars. All I'm doing here is just getting any air pockets that are in there out. Since this is fairly liquid, you're not probably gonna get any, but just in case, it's always good to check. Then I will take my tool and turn it back around and just double check on my headspace, and that didn't move. If you were making or canning something thicker substance and you had a lot of air bubbles in there and the air bubbles came out, that line may go down and you'll have to refill and add some more to make sure you have the proper headspace. Now I just have a little bit of white distilled vinegar, and I'm going to put it on a clean towel and wipe all of my rims. The white vinegar is not necessarily the only way. People sometimes just get a wet cloth. Sometimes they just do it with a dry cloth. Totally up to you. I always like the white vinegar when I'm doing something like tomato sauce or something with a lot of grime to it, because if anything is stuck on the rims, it will hinder your seal, and this just kind of helps to get it off easier than just trying to scrub with a little bit of a clean towel. Okay, now that I have it clean, I'm taking my clean lids and putting them on each. A lid can only be used once, so once you crack one of these jars open to eat, the lid needs to be thrown away. But the rings you can save over and over and over again and just purchase more lids every canning season. Okay, and now I'm going to twist these on and just airtight, fingertip tight. So you don't want them super, this one's struggling, come on, there we go. You don't want them super tight on your jars. If they are super tight, you are going to have problems with seepage. So if it's too tight and you really crank them down, you could potentially have your food come up out of it. You want your lids to be able to move a little bit to find that sweet spot and find that seal. Okay, so now we're gonna get them. Okay, so now my canner is nice and rolling boil right now, and I am going to put my jars into the canner. You want your water level to be over the top, about 1 inch to 2 inches above your jars. So it needs to be completely submerged inside. If it is not, you need to add more water. I definitely do not have enough water in here for my quart-sized jars, so I'm gonna add more water to make sure that my jars are completely submerged underneath it. Okay, so my jars are now completely submerged. I had to add about 1 gallon of water. I definitely did not have enough water in there. And so it's gonna take a few minutes for my water to come back to a boil, because it already was at a boil, but with adding, even though I added hot water from the tap, it's still, it's gonna take a little bit of time. I'm gonna process these for 40 minutes, but I am not going to start my timer for that 40 minutes until this comes back and I can hear it back to a rolling boil. So I will do that, and then we'll stay tuned and we'll see when they come out. Okay, so I can hear my water boiling again. I'm gonna go ahead and start my timer for 40 minutes. If at any point during the processing time your water stops boiling, you'll have to restart your timer. So it needs to process for the full 40 minutes. If you had all pint-sized jars in there, then you would do it for 35 minutes. So once the water is boiling, you're gonna let it go for 40 minutes, and then when the timer goes off, I'm gonna turn off my canner and take the lid off and let them sit for just a minute. Okay, so my timer went off at the 40 minutes. I went ahead and turned off my stove, and actually, I'm gonna grab a pot holder because the pan or the lid is very, very hot. And I'm gonna go ahead and take my lid off. I'm not gonna remove my jars quite yet. It's still boiling hot in there. And if you remove them too quickly, your jars may crack. They just are too shocked by the temperature change. So I'm gonna let this sit for about 5 minutes with the lid off, and then I'm gonna go ahead and use my handy tool here and take them out of the canner. I'm gonna set them on this clean dish towel that I have right here next to my stovetop and leave them undisturbed for a day. So I won't go until tomorrow morning. They just need to be completely cooled down before messing with them. You may hear them pop, you may not, but it's best not to mess with them, touch them, put them somewhere where your kids, no one will mess with them until they are completely down and the lids have sealed. So we may get a little pop while we're waiting here, and you'll get to hear what it sounds like when your jars seal properly. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the jars. I removed one already. This part is is pretty important. It's important not to tilt your jars to get any excess water off of the top. I know it's really tempting, especially for someone OCD like me, to remove that water off of the top. But right now, some of your jars may not be sealed. They seal sometimes when they come out. You might hear the pop. I already heard one pop. And so if you move it, the food could touch that seal and get along that rim if the lid is not completely sealed and vacuumed onto it yet. And so it's important to just really be gentle with them. Don't touch them against each other. Don't hit anything. Just really gently remove them, place them, and then leave them undisturbed until they are completely cooled down. And hopefully you get to hear the pops. I heard one earlier, and I haven't heard the other two yet. But if you don't hear them, it does not mean that they are not sealed properly. So just remember that. They could have popped inside the counter and you just didn't even know. So if you hear this nice, sweet little pop sound, then you know that they are sealed properly. If you don't hear that, there is still a way to check, and we will do that tomorrow. Okay, so our tomato sauce has been sitting here for well over 24 hours, we're right at the 24-hour mark. Doesn't need to be 24 hours, just needs to be completely cooled down. And then I did not hear any of them pop except for one. So one of them I heard pop. And so the rest of them, all I do is just touch the middle of the lid, and if it does not bounce back at you like a Snapples cap, once you open the Snapples and you push on it, you know how it makes that popping sound. If it doesn't pop back at you, then you know that they have sealed. So if you didn't hear the pops, that doesn't mean they didn't seal. Push on the top and they should be sealed. Okay, so now I'm going to take all of my rings off. I do not store my jars with the rings on. There's no need to. So I always remove my rings after I'm done canning, before I wipe them down, label them, and put them on the shelf. And then I just take a clean rag here that's wet, and there's not anything grimy on the outsides of these, so I don't need to run them under water. If there was, I would run them under some nice cool water just to get all of the yucks off of it. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Now I'm going to label the top tomato sauce 2020. It's so important to label, and when you put them on your shelf, to put your newest ones farthest back and push the oldest first or front. You always want to just be working through the oldest first so nothing gets stuck in the back and then it's there for years. Not saying that with a proper seal that it's no longer good for you, but just to be safe, it's safer to keep eating the oldest first and putting these in the back. So I'm gonna label them 2020 tomato sauce. And then I will stick them in my canning closet until we're ready to use them throughout